Good afternoon or good evening, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on. Welcome to this live webinar hosted by Pomerol Partners. It's great to have everyone on today. Great to have so much interest in the Writeback extension as we head into this launch of version 3. The extension's really taken on a life of its own. We're seeing an incredible range of use cases coming out of the woodwork, and yeah, it's great to see the impact that it's having on many of our clients' Qlik applications. We've held two 30-minute webinars, one business focused and one technical focused. This webinar is going to be focused more on the technical aspects of how the extension works and implementation. We'll look briefly at the common use cases and then move on to how the extension actually works, the front-end configuration, how to set up the database tables to write back to, essentially what you need to know to implement the extension within your environment. Both webinars will be available on demand, so you'll have a chance to refer back to the business user session too. So just some quick intros so that you know who's talking to you. My name's Scott Duthie. I'm a principal consultant at Pomerol Partners. I've been with the firm for nearly 5 years. I spent a few years with the firm in London before relocating to Denver to help kick off our US operations. I've spent a lot of time in the Qlik ecosystem as a developer, and I've been heavily involved in steering the development of this product, which is why I'm presenting this session today. A little bit of background on Pomerol Partners and who we are as a company. We're a business intelligence consultancy. We're heavily focused on helping companies produce high impact reporting to optimize processes and then inevitably increase revenues, lower costs. We often use the Qlik platform to deliver our solutions, and as an elite partner of Qlik of many years, maybe 6 or 7 years now, we know the platform intimately. However, we do also partner with many other software providers in the BI space, especially on the predictive analytics and machine learning side, and we spend a lot of time helping companies integrate other platforms and tools with their Qlik ecosystem. As a company, we were born out of the investment banking industry in London, so that's sort of where our roots are. We've since broadened our reach, and we now have clients in many sectors, pharmaceuticals, retail, many in supply chain and manufacturing, just to name a few industries there. In response to an ever-increasing demand for our services in the US, we opened an office in Chicago about 3 years ago. And so we now have a team of 70 consultants between the UK, the US, and South Africa. We work closely with a broad range of clients of all sizes, and many of these are currently using the Writeback extension in their Qlik environments. I think the experience we've gained in deploying the extension, especially in large enterprises, has been extremely valuable. We've encountered all the nuances of multi-node environments and complex security, and that's really put us in a good position to head forward and do a lot more implementations in those large enterprises, which do tend to be more complex. So in terms of an agenda, we've got a wide range of people on the webinar today. Some more technical or interested in a more technical deep dive than others. So I'll try to cover all bases. Please enter any questions you have into the chat. If we don't have any time to address those during the session, we'll follow up on those directly after the webinar today. So in terms of an agenda, we'll just have a quick look at what the Writeback extension is, how it can improve the Qlik experience and what the common use cases are. We won't dwell on that too much. It's a bit more business focused there, talking about the use cases, but we'll dive straight into a product demo. We'll look at the Writeback extension actually working within a Qlik application. And then we'll jump back out and have a look at a few more slides that go over things like the Qlik load script and data model options. We'll address things like partial reloads. We'll take a look at monitoring users in the Writeback extension and how we handle errors and logging. We'll do a quick recap on sort of where the value and ROI is. And I think that's really important for both the business users and the technical or IT side to understand. And then we'll address sort of pricing and implementation and how that process works. And I'm going pretty fast today. We've got a lot of content to cover in 30 minutes, but we're just going to try and keep this quick and condensed. So what is the Writeback extension? It's an extension for your Qlik Sense environment that allows both analyzer and professional license holders to input and capture data directly within their published Qlik applications. So where you would traditionally need to update or edit your source data in maybe the ERP or CRM system, or maybe you're making those updates in an Excel spreadsheet or in a collaborative environment like SharePoint or a Google Doc or Monday.com. The Writeback extension will allow you to capture that data from within the Qlik app itself, push it out to a SQL database, and then load it back in so that the amended data is embedded within the associative data model and available for the users instantly. I've seen some pretty cool bolt-ons to the Qlik environment and the Qlik ecosystem over the years, but this is one in particular that I'm pretty excited about, and that's really because it disrupts that traditional data flow through the Qlik ecosystem. For the business user, BI tools are generally a read-only product. You know, they're a huge leap forward from using Excel for analysis and visualization, but they've often lacked the interactivity that data input enables, and that collaboration between end users is often quite difficult. So, I mean, more than ever, Qlik users are looking at using Qlik as a more of a platform than just a ring-fenced data visualization product. And users are looking for ways to connect to and integrate with other systems. And so the Writeback extension is really just a natural progression in that area. So now we've got a basic understanding of sort of what the extension does and the data flow behind it. So how can this extension improve the Qlik experience? And I'm going to go through this pretty fast, but the 3 points that we've boiled this down to is, the first one is doing more within Qlik. So it removes the need for users to leave the Qlik environment to capture data and then wait for it to come back into their dashboards. And then the second piece, which is really a product of the first, is it accelerates that pace of the data cycle. So BI vendors often talk about analytics at the pace of business, but waiting for applications to refresh on a schedule can be a real bottleneck. So being able to adjust a forecast number and share that with your team who are also looking at that Qlik app immediately, or comment on a transaction and share that with finance, any of these kind of operations, it turns Qlik into more of a true operational tool as opposed to just a read-only tool. And the third piece here is really all about driving collaboration. So analytics shouldn't be read-only. It should be a two-way conversation and truly interactive, and this is what the Writeback extension enables. So that's a quick touch on how it can improve the user experience, but how are people actually using this in the real world? So quite a few use cases in sales. People are using it to add notes to sales opportunities or enrich the customer record with data points that might not be available in the CRM. So that's really useful for a short-term requirement, like what's the customer's response to a certain promotion. Might be something that we don't actually want to go and make a permanent edit to the CRM system, but we can capture that information using the Writeback extension and sort of hold it off on the side, maybe in the short to medium term, and then remove it when it's no longer relevant. Sales are also using the extension to model the impact of discounts, things like that, create an approval workflow. In operations, we're seeing production line managers on the factory floor. They're using it to do things like record fallout and issues on the production line. Quite a few use cases in finance. It's a great way to capture variance commentary. We've got finance teams that are pushing out OPEX transactions to managers and asking for explanations or narratives on certain invoices or certain expenses. And there's quite a few use cases on the IT side as well. So I think almost every Qlik environment I've been involved with has used Excel files in some capacity. It might just be for mapping or reference tables to help clean up and feed the Qlik environment. We can actually get rid of Excel and just manage those mapping tables for your Qlik environment within a single Qlik app. So we can highlight unmapped data or data issues. We can enter in our edits or what the mappings should be, and actually manage that all from within a Qlik app. So what I want to do here is look at the traditional data flow in Qlik from left to right. So obviously on the left here, we've got a range of enterprise data sources. Traditionally, these data sources are going to be loaded into our Qlik environment on some kind of a task or refresh schedule. It might be hourly, it might be daily, but either way, it's on a fixed schedule that the user cannot have any control over. Now, you may have some other ETL process external to Qlik, or you might be fully using the Qlik ETL engine, but either way, you'll be creating a set of QVDs that your Qlik apps will be consuming. So what we have over on the right here is essentially our Qlik environment. So what's happening with the extension, and the extension's represented by that blue box in the middle. On the Qlik Sense server, we've got two components. We've got an extension that we import into the QMC, just like any other extension. And then we've got a Node.js app. And this is also installed and sits on that Qlik Sense server. So what's happening when the user makes edits is that the Node.js app that hosts the RESTful API receives those edits from the extension and then passes those edits into SQL queries. That data is then pushed to our SQL database. As soon as the data is committed to that SQL database, a partial reload of the Qlik application is triggered, and then that data is pulled back into memory into the Qlik app. So the key thing to note here is that while your traditional ETL flow is running on a schedule that may be hourly or daily, the writeback extension is enabling edits that update the data model in real time, on demand, based on the user's request, essentially. So that was a very brief look at sort of how and where the writeback process fits into that Qlik architecture and workflow. I want to peel away another layer here and just focus in on this iterative sort of writeback cycle over on the right-hand side. So we've got our Qlik app loaded up with data and held in memory, and that's based on the user's selections. And when the user makes selections, we've got a remaining subset of data, and that is pushed into a hypercube and then visualized within the HTML pop-up window, which is where users edit data. Now, when we've finished making our data edits and hit save, the Node.js app hosting that API receives input JSON data. The app constructs those SQL queries to insert that data into the writeback database. So note here that the API needs a dedicated port to run on that Qlik Sense server. The Node app authenticates with the SQL database via a service account. We can actually enable Windows authentication there as well. But yeah, we can either use a username and password authentication, or we can use Windows authentication. Now on the database side, each instance of the extension in a Qlik Sense app, it'll have 3 tables in the SQL database that are associated with it. The latest edits for each unique record are going to be stored in the data table. And then all of the historical edits, they'll be stored in the history table. And we'll take a closer look at exactly why it's set up like that shortly. So once those edits are committed, a sort of confirmation or response is sent to the writeback app that the update has taken place in the database. The Qlik Engine API initiates a partial reload of the application. So load statements that are specific to partial reloads are run in the Qlik load script. So those are the add, replace, or is partial reload functions, and we'll also take a look at those shortly. And that edited data is pulled back into Qlik into memory. So now this cycle can happen, as often as needed. It could be constantly throughout the day. It might just be to support a month-end process, for example. And then just a quick note on concurrent usage. So we have an inbuilt queuing mechanism that will stagger the Qlik reloads should multiple users try and perform a writeback at the same time. So we can have multiple users, we can have dozens or hundreds of users that are all using the same Qlik app and are all making edits. And each time they commit those edits and a partial reload is triggered, those partial reloads will be staggered so that they don't conflict with each other. So now I think we've got a pretty good understanding of the workflow. We can take a look at the extension in action, but just firstly, I just want to introduce a few user profiles that we can accommodate, and I'll refer to these as we sort of go through the extension. But we've got this concept of an admin user, and the admin user can actually manage user access for the other users. They can also adjust settings, and they can edit all of the fields that are available in the extension. We then have a user that has access to all fields. So this is sort of a power user. They can edit everything. And then what we can also do is we can actually restrict some fields from a user. So this middle user here might be a sales manager, for example, and they might have a status field for approving and rejecting edits. And we might see that this other user is restricted and they don't have access for that ability to approve or reject edits. And then of course, we've got a read-only user. So this user really has no licensed access to the extension. So they can see the edits that other people are making in our Qlik reports, but they don't have any access to the extension to actually make edits themselves. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into a Qlik application now. We can do a quick demo of the extension in action. So we're looking at a common sales use case here where we have sales reps applying discounts to transactions. So the first 4 or 5 columns here in blue on the left, these represent transactions from the ERP system. These are sort of wholesale food sales to restaurants. Now, what we're using the Writeback extension for is to add all of this information here over on the right. So we're applying a discount. We're seeing what impact that has going from gross to net sales here. We can allocate a sort of product type related to the transaction. We can leave a comment as to why we allocated the transaction. We can mark it for expedited delivery, things like that. So if I go and actually filter down, we can look at one of these restaurants here. I'll pick the Jazz House. We can go and pick a subset of transactions here related to this customer. Now down in the bottom right-hand corner here, this is my extension. So if I click on the extension, what's going to happen is it's going to push that subset of data that I've filtered down to into my data editing window here. So what I can do is I can come in and the first thing I can do is allocate a product type. So I've effectively got a filter pane here, and this is working really similar to the default filter pane object in Qlik Sense. It's showing me all of the available values that exist in this field within the data model. So next I can actually come and allocate a discount to the transactions. So I might want to edit these individually, or potentially I want to allocate a discount in bulk to the whole column. So I've just applied a discount of 55% down the whole column. We've only selected 6 transactions here, but this could be hundreds of transactions if that was appropriate. I can do the same thing here. I've got a text comment here as to why have I allocated this discount of 55%. I might make this, this could be our November special deal, for example, and I'm going to apply that to all of my rows. I might need to mark some of these transactions here for expedited delivery. And then I might also need to give this a status. So as I mentioned earlier, if I was the sales rep, potentially I wouldn't see this column. It could be hidden from me. If I was a sales manager, I might have the rights to come in here and sort of approve and reject these transactions. Now, once we've made our edits, we can hit save. And so what's happening in the background here is the Node.js app has passed those data edits into SQL queries. We've pushed that back to our SQL database. The Qlik application has partially reloaded in the background, and we can see that new information. So our 55% discount, our November special deal, and we marked a couple of these for rush delivery. And we can see we have that data now in memory back in the Qlik application, and now we can carry on with our analysis with our data model updated. So another way to quickly look at this, it might be I might come in here as a sales manager, for example, and I might want to look at just the pending transactions, and my job is to come in sort of reject or approve these transactions. So maybe I just want to look at ones from November this year, for example. So I can filter down to whatever data set is appropriate. I can pop open my extension window, And then I can come in and actually start allocating a status to these. I might want to reject or approve these. If I've rejected them, I might want to put in a discount here, this breaches the limit, for example, and I can hit save. So that's just an example of how a different type of user, a sales rep there, for example, might come and interact with the extension. So we've looked at a couple of editing examples there. Let's take a look at sort of what other functionality exists within the actual GUI of the extension there. So I'm just going to filter on a few transactions, and we'll pop open the extension window here again. Great, so this will always open on the Edit Data tab. We also have a Settings tab here, and what we can do in here is we can control how the user interacts with the extension. So we can see on the status field here, we had this marked as restricted, and this is where we would hide this field for a particular group of users so we could create that sort of approval workflow. We can choose whether or not we want these fields to be bulk editable. So we might want to be able to apply a discount to 1,000 rows at a time, or maybe for the comments or the narrative, we might want to force the user to fill this out line by line. That would just be an example. We can also choose what type of edit is appropriate for this field. And so we have a manually maintained drop-down box. We've got the filter pane concept from Qlik Sense. We have a numeric or text input box, and we've also got a checkbox here as well. Now, the third piece of the panel here to this extension window is actually the user management console. So what I can do in here is I can come and find a user, and I can actually remove that user, or on the inverse, I can actually go and add a user. So I can pick my directory, and this is referring back to our Qlik QMC. So I'm looking at the Pomerol user directory. I can pick John Fitzgerald as an example as a user I want to add. I'm going to make him an admin user, and I'm going to say he's not restricted to any of our special fields. I can hit submit here, and it's going to add that user and update our user list over on the left here. So that's a quick overview of the user interface of the extension. I want to take a quick look at sort of how the extension is configured from the perspective of the app builder and what they need to do to set this up. So the first thing we need to do is we actually need to set up the tables in the SQL database that the extension is going to be writing back to. Now, one thing we do here is we provide a sort of just in Excel, we've got a simple SQL script wizard. And the idea here is that we can enter in the fields that we want to be in our SQL tables. We can define the data types. So we've got a data and history table and a settings table. And what this will do for us is it'll auto generate some script that we can just copy and paste into SQL, and we can really quickly generate those tables. So the point here, and we're looking at our tables here, we've got our data table, our history table, and our settings table. And the idea here is that if we've got a new use case for the Qlik Writeback extension here, and we want to put this into a new app, we can really quickly set up the SQL environment to support that use case. So after we've set up the SQL tables, the next thing we need to do is we actually need to make some amendments to the Qlik load script. And the reason why is that every time I make my edits, after I hit save data and I commit that data to the SQL database, remember we're triggering that partial reload. So in the Qlik script itself, I actually need to come in here and create a section where on a partial reload, and you can see we're using the replace and the is partial reload function here, I need to come and add this section into my script to tell Qlik how do you want to incorporate this edited information into our data model. And then the last piece here is the actual front-end settings and configuration for the extension itself. So if I go into edit mode, we can see we've got the extension object here up on the top right. And what I need to define in here is my dimensions. So these are the fields that I want to be editing and writing back to my database. And then the second piece here is my connection properties. So these are the names of the tables that I'm writing back to. And I also need to state the API URL. So how is the extension communicating with that Node.js application? Okay, let's jump out of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump back into a couple of slides so we can take a closer look at a few of these things around the load script and the partial reloads. So I mentioned previously that we split the data storage into two tables in the database. And the reason for this is as follows, and I'll use a simple example to illustrate. So you might have sales reps that are updating a status about a customer's attitude towards a promotion, for example. And this comment might evolve over time. They might be updating this every couple of days. So there may be no need to see any of the historical comments. So what we can do is each time a writeback is performed, we can simply point the partial reload at the data table, and we can ignore the history if we want. So this would keep the load time very quick and fast. In another scenario, we might be using the writeback extension to manage a negotiation process. And so it may be very useful to monitor that history. So every time we do a partial reload, we might want to actually see all of the history as well as the latest edit so that we can see that trend and see the full historical flow. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump back across and show how within the application here, I can actually pick a transaction and we can actually see all of the editing history related to that transaction. So from the history table in the SQL database here for this particular transaction, we're recording a timestamp here of when the edits were made, and I can see the Qlik user here over on the right, and we can actually see all of the edits that were made across the full history of this particular transaction. And then we can go and put this in a chart as well. So if this was a negotiation process, here we're looking at, well, based on all these proposed discounts, how did this impact the net value of the transaction? We can sort of monitor this over time. Okay, so we need to use partial reloads of the Qlik app to minimize the time it takes to pull that data back from SQL into memory. We might have a Qlik app that has a huge transaction table with millions of rows. So we obviously don't want to reload the full application each time someone makes an edit. Now, Qlik has 3 statements that can be used to trigger partial reloads. We've got the replace statement, the add statement, and the is partial reload statement. And depending on the use case, we can use we can use any sort of combination of these statements to cater for what our particular use case is. There's a few things to note around partial reloads, especially if you haven't used them before. We need to be aware of sort of how many keys are in those tables that we're partially reloading. And these are the kinds of things that we would talk you through based on your use case and sort of help you out on and give some advice on. So in terms of user monitoring and error handling, so the user monitoring piece is really what I've just showed you there. We can see all of those edits that all users have made over time. We can audit those and track those. In terms of actually error handling in the extension itself, we've got status messages within that actual GUI, within the pop-up, that tell us whether the writeback extension is ready and live and ready to write back to that SQL database. We've got we've got those error messages and configuration error messages in case some of the settings are incorrect. We've got a full debug logging files that are generated in the background to pick up any errors there. And then in terms of the Qlik reload process and getting that script right, we can use the native script, Qlik script logs, to debug any of those partial reloads. So just jumping back across to the extension again, I'll just show you an example of some of those error messages. So I'm just going to grab a subset of these transactions again. And if I pop open my extension editing window, we can see up in the top right-hand corner of the window here, we've got this tick beside DB status. And what this is telling me is that my settings, data, and history tables are all connected. We're live with the SQL database, and we're ready to do a write back. Now, if I come in here and actually intentionally create an error in my extension, so what I could do here, I might accidentally have misspelt one of these table names when I set this up. What we'll see here is that when we go to open up the writeback extension, that error message is going to be throwing an error here. And if we hover over that error, it's going to tell us the settings table's fine, the history table's fine, but the data table, it can't find this table in the SQL database. We're not live and we're not ready to do a write back. We need to fix this error before we proceed. So that's just a quick example of some of the error messages. We've tried to make those as sort of proactive as possible so that any errors get resolved before it gets to the point where the user experience is being hampered. Now, I know we're getting tight on time, so I'm just going to run quickly through these last few slides. In terms of pipeline, we've got a couple of new write-back options, MariaDB and Google BigQuery, and we're looking to get these pushed out in Q1 of 2020. We're going to get a new edit type, a date picker. We've had a lot of demand for that, so we can use a date picker similar to how you would be sort of booking flights and picking from a calendar. Enhanced customization of the pop-up window. Improved license management and monitoring, and we're also working on a form view as opposed to the current sort of list view that we have in there. Before I touch on pricing and implementation, I just wanted to have a quick recap of the value and ROI. So the first piece here is really around reducing that spreadsheet risk. So removing some of those manual spreadsheets from your Qlik ecosystem, getting rid of the consolidation of spreadsheets and the errors that are prone to spreadsheets. Using that SQL database as opposed to a spreadsheet and the native governance that's built into that. Increase in productivity is one of the other big gains. So users being able, those sort of quick iterations, I guess, of entering data and seeing the results significantly improves processes, saves time, saves effort. And lastly, if we can remove the need for some other tools like Monday.com, or we might have users that access the CRM or ERP system that have very light usage needs, and we might be able to remove the need for them to have a license to those systems and actually just rely on what we have available within Qlik and within that native environment, which is already paid for effectively. In terms of implementation, we'll send out a prerequisite checklist to make sure we've got the correct Node and Java versions installed, and we're all ready to go from that perspective. We'll send across a package that contains the extension, sort of front end and back end, and an example Qlik application. So once that package has been sent out, we'll schedule an install call, and we'll generally do the install and sort of walk you through these processes over an interactive call, and we'll get your first use case up and running within the Qlik environment. In terms of moving forward and sort of getting more information, so a recording of this webinar is going to be available for your reference or to share with colleagues. For any specific questions, we can jump on a demo call and we can walk through your use cases in detail. Beyond that, we have a demo environment and sample apps. We can actually grant you access to our demo environment so you can play around with some of those apps. Beyond that, we can also set up a demo app with your data and in our environment, and we can get that set up pretty rapidly. So that's a really good way to do a proof of value. And then beyond that, we can also do a proof of value pilot within your own environment. So plenty of options there to get more information or to evaluate the extension against your use cases. And then last piece, in terms of pricing's on a per user per month basis. SMB pricing starts at $25 per user per month, and that's for an install base of 25 users. Moving on to enterprise, we have volume discounts that kick in after 100 users. And then one thing to note here is that not all users in your Qlik environment need a write-back license. So you might have 100 users of an application, but only 25 need to use the write-back. So you only need to license those 25 users. So I just want to say thanks for everyone for joining the call today. I know I ran a couple of minutes over. As mentioned earlier, please feel free to reach out to me directly on scott@pomerolpartners.com if you've got questions. Head to the Pomerol Partners website. You can request a demo there or get a call set up so we can have a look at your use cases. Thanks for your time. Bye for now.